So let's start our today's afternoon sessions on this kind of digital economic regulations in China. And digital economic refers to like any economical or commercial activities that's related to digital world, including internet, digital trade, e-commerce, etc., etc. And I'm trying to include a broader scope because they also share the third principle as well, and to see how we can help your business grow. And we are not talking about business success in these presentations. We're majorly talking about how to be legal and how to prevent yourself from being abandoned. Because in the morning session, we have mentioned that the number of websites and the number of apps has decreased continuously for 3 years. And partially the reason is that's because regulation is stricter and stricter. And many startups, even domestic startups, cannot have a very clear idea on how to keep themselves legal and proper. And that's why I'm preparing these presentations. And we are going to talk about 4 topics today. The first one is overview of data protection policy in China. There are actually about 30 plus regulations. Some of them are law, some of them are standard. It is pointless to learn every of them. But there are some basic principles from the higher regulations, as all other regulations are derived from these higher regulations. And as long as you keep yourself consistent with these higher regulations, you should be fine. And second, we were talking about something specific called ICP license. And the ICP license is a way that's keep yourself legit and legal to running internet-based businesses. And the third one is we are talking about data, because data privacy and data protection is a trending topic not only in China but also globally. And understanding this part will also help you to develop your business, perhaps in Korea, in Europe, and the United States as well. I'm majorly well focusing on China law, and the most advanced and enacted law is actually the General Data Protection Regulations enacted by European Union. And I am external facilitators that helps the Beijing government to run its own data protection policy as well. So I'm quite familiar with this part. And if you have more questions, you can ask me after this session as well. And the fourth one, we are talking about solving problems with the business mode, because something we will cover in the second part is this, the restrictions for FIE. So FIE stands for the Foreign Invested Enterprises, including WFE, like the wholly owned by wholly foreign owned enterprises as well. So conducting some internet-based activities might be influenced by the nature of the company as well. And we are talking about how to solve this problem with different business mode. And so let's go through the part 1. So it's an overview of data protection policy in China. And data protection or internet regulation is quite a new topic in today's age. And to be honest, there are many gray zones of this kind of regulations. And that's why there are so many ministries are involved into this. There are actually 4 ministries who is involved in this kind of data regulations and internet regulations. They are Cyberspace Administration of China. So they are, as the name suggests, they are majorly focusing on internet data regulations. And they particularly focusing on personal data collection and its usage. And the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, they make lots of standard. Actually, all the standard is enacted by the MIIT, so the Ministry of Industry and Information Technologies. And they also have a very special regulations on data and information authenticities. So they want to make you sure if you have posted news or content on internet, you should make sure it is real and you should keep it safe. And the Ministry of Public Security, they focus on cybercrime as well, and they make standards for data protection as well, which we will go through later. And we are talking about General Administration for Market Supervision. And they are focusing on improper collection and usage in commerce, and they are also in charge of the regulation of e-commerce as well. And on the left side, I have listed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, sixth, perhaps the most important regulations that are relevant to you. So cybersecurity law and data security law are law. So they're related to crime if you do not obey it. And measures of the cybersecurity review is actually recommendations that's how should you keep yourself safe. And the rest three are actually industrial standard, national industrial standard. And they are about how to keep the big data safe, how to keep the personal data safe, and also if you really, really want to export some data abroad, I think it's especially important for a foreign startup who want to develop in China. This one is just a draft for comments, so it haven't enacted yet, and it means today's this kind of ministries and regulation authorities don't really have an idea on how to do this. But Beijing government is working on this, and I think we are going to have an answer soon. Okay, as I just mentioned, there are 30 plus regulations, or at least 30 plus. If we counted some relevant laws that are not focusing on it, it could be 50 plus. So it is pointless for a startup to go through all of these regulations. It will be very, very time consuming. Usually for mature tech startup in China, they will have a team from 3 to 5 people composed by the government relation department and legal department. So there will be a team who focusing on this kind of regulations and doing self-checks and negotiating government. But if you're just a team that's totally just have 3 to 5 people, it is pointless for you to spend lots of times on reading and understanding these regulations. But you only need to understand there are 3 right lines of internet activities that you shouldn't violate. And I summarized this from these 30 plus regulations. And I have also put some negative cases that you need to think about. So the first one is do not distributing harmful informations, including fake news, rumor, and information that may damage national security or national secrets. And one of the examples is actually Facebook. Facebook was once about to go in China, but after Facebook becomes popular, the China's Ministry of Cybersecurity, Cybersecurity Administration of China started to talk to Facebook because they are probably run overseas and they are not obeying the Chinese regulations. For example, they are separating some rumors about the Chinese government, some rumors about some celebrities, etc., etc. So, and they refuse to delete this kind of message if requested by the government. Actually, they delete messages if requested by the US government. So it's actually political compact. So Chinese government is not a big fan of trade protection on the internet world, because we know that we do have many brilliant apps and websites are actually brought from overseas. So as long as you are under the guidelines of this kind of regulations, keep yourself collaborated with government if they have some request, and at the very beginning, keep your news just real and you have evidence to prove your news, it should be fine. And second is the mail collection and the usage of personal data. And I will talk about what are content for personal data later. So it's usually for privacy protection, public right, and public security. So Zao is a deep fake app. So it's used artificial intelligence that can change your face to some celebrities, movie stars, etc., etc. But in its term of use, it asks users to authorize this app to use the user's face for future needs, but they do not specify what they will use if they collect your facial figures. And that violates the law because it is a mail collection and the usage of personal data. And I will talk about more about how to correctly use and collect personal data later. And the second, and the third, sorry, is the export of sensitive data. because China have a very, very big demand of its data autonomies. So basically that China wants to make sure that all the data is controlled by itself. Because data leakage can damage public security, public welfare, and national security. So there is a very strong need to that to be regulated, but unfortunately, the data export regulations is still just a draft of comment, and there is currently no very clear way that tells you how should you do this. But there are some recommendations from the government, and I will take it later. And Tesla is one of the biggest examples of this kind of negative cases, because we all know that the business model of Tesla is not that it's selling cars, it's actually selling services, and it's collecting road data to improve its autonomous driving. But the problem is when it collects the road data from Chinese cities, no one knows, and the Tesla do not specify that's where they store this data, and the very likely is that they send this data back to Americans, and they cannot guarantee that this highly specified road map will not be used for military use, and that makes the Chinese government very sensitive. And actually, Tesla is have been invited for tea discussion by five ministries, and one of them is the Central Cybersecurity Administrations. Usually, it is the local cybersecurity administrations is responsible for this kind of data regulations. But if you are invited by the Central Cybersecurity Administrations, it means the data security problem is potentially damaging for national securities. So it's actually a very severe problem, and Tesla in China is underwent a series of negative market exposures. So yeah, make sure that you store the data local, and if you really want to export it, there are some ways to do so. And we just talked about three basic principles for the three guidelines you should violate. And after you have constructed your business model and your website architecture, etc., based on this kind of principles, you should apply for an ICP license. But what is an ICP license? So ICP license is an internet content provider. The full name is Internet Content Provider License. So it's a subtype of the value-added telecommunication service. So it focuses on online information services, which is a permit issued by the Chinese Ministries of Industry Information Technology, the MIIT I just mentioned. And it's to permit Chinese-based website to operate in China. So it's a very important Chinese-based website. You have your server located in China and you operate in China. And there's two categories of ICP licenses. The first one is for commercial websites. That's basically you're earning money from the website. And another one is for non-commercial websites. So for example, is enterprise official websites just to exhibit its activities, its product, a communication window. So it doesn't earn money from the website, it is okay. So what you need to do is ICP filings. You only need to register it. You do not need to be licensed. And a note is that whether the page involves online payment or not is related to the commerciality of the website, which is, and the commerciality of the website is decided by the necessity of the website for commercial activities. And I will give 5 examples for it. So the scope of ICP license. So the first one, the information release platform and delivery service. TikToks, for example, is so it is a release platform for short videos, and also you can receive short videos as well. So in the ICP license, and the same thing, and similarly for YouTube, but still YouTube and Google doesn't want to obey the regulation of the Chinese government, so they are blocked. And Google as an information search and query service, they need ICP license as well. So though they don't charge users for their search, but they charge like for advertisement, and this website is necessary for their commercial activities, then it means in that ICP license. And for information community platform service like Twitter, where you are running your own communication and you want to have a website on it, you also need an ICP license on it. And instant chat, so information real-time interactive service like Lines or Facebook messages, you need the ICP license as well. And the fourth one is the information protection and processing service. And usually it refers to the antivirus services. The one example will be McAfee. Actually, so none of these 5 companies on this page have an ICP license in China. So they cannot really conduct their business in China, except McAfee, because McAfee have another license in other channels. So it claims that they are not doing an internet-based service, which is still okay. But if you are doing this so you are doing information-centric services, you need an ICP license. And if you don't have one and someone report you, or if you don't have someone but you are being noticed by the government, your server will be shut down or it will be blocked. And that's partially the reason why for the past 3 years, there's a continuing decrease of the website and apps in China. Oops, I think I have 2 pictures here, but anyway, so it just should be a picture of the EDI license, which is such an example, then, which is not important. So the EDI license is a license different from the ICP license, but it's also a part of the VATS, so the value-added telecommunication services licensing. It's really depend on the nature of your businesses. If you are doing an e-commerce platform and other B2B data exchange platforms, what you need is not an ICP license, but a EDI license. So data, so EDI stands for electronic data interchange. So an easy way to distinguish whether you should apply for ICP data or you should apply for EDI data is as how many parties are involved. If there are only 2 parties involved, that is you and you end users, you apply for RCPs. And if it is many parties who exchanges data and doing e-commerce, for example, e-commerce, it got. So in the case of e-commerce, there are at least 3 parties: sellers, buyers, as a platform. So they need an EDI license. So for example, there's many startups are doing travel tax. So there are even more parties involved, like hotels, restaurants, and consumers, and also perhaps flight companies, and also a dueling platform that need an EDI license as well. So I have just mentioned that it is very important to have an ICP license or an EDI license if you are conducting internet-based activities here in China. But unluckily, so there is a restriction for foreign enterprise that perhaps if you are a companies whose shareholder is more than 50% is from a foreign entities, it could be a foreign individual or it can be a foreign companies, then currently it cannot apply an ICP license. It might object to changes recently, but so far I haven't heard any news about that. So even there are many people who are proposing it, and I think some changes perhaps will happen next year's. But there is still a risk if you are not obeying that. But there are many solutions that I will talk as the last of these presentations. You can solve it by business mode. So here are the regulations. We can have a look. So it's telecom companies, which means Whether you are doing websites or apps, they are all telecom companies in Chinese term. So that China has promised to open after the China's accession to the WTO. I have also put a web link here, but if you want to have a look at what is exactly opened. So, and also there is a 50% of the shareholds by the foreign entity is a maximum. So it means usually if a foreign company want to have an ICP license, it can only take 49% of the total sharehold. And if you are doing basic telecommunications, well, it's not for startup, but usually it's controlled by the Chinese parties. And also we have a session previously called VIE structure, and that's basically because it's forbidden for foreigner VCs to invest in internet information service, online publishing service, audiovisual programs, etc., etc. Internet cultural operations is a very weird term, but usually it means online movies, cartoons, dramas, gaming is also internet cultural operations, and music is allowed. I don't know why, but it is allowed. And also internet release information services. So basically all kind of these 5 services that are under the scope of ICP license is internet information releasing service. So it seems that it is impossible for foreign companies to conducting ICP, internet content providing activities in China, but actually it is not true, and I will tell you how to solve it later. And also there are many people ask me, can I just locate the server abroad, like I just stay the server in Korean, in US, in UK, etc., or in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, because this kind of regulation doesn't really apply to this special zone of China. And can I just thus escape the regulations? The answer is yes. It works at the very beginning. So if you're a startup, it is okay. But if the internet traffic exceeds a certain threshold, I don't know how many threshold, perhaps it's like 2,000 visits per day or something like that, you will attract the attention from the Cybersecurity Administration. If your website actually scope of ICP or EDI, they will block you. And another thing is that if you are reported, for example, your competitors report you, or you have a client and they are super dissatisfied with your service for some random reasons, and he or she report you, and your server will be blocked as well. So you can do it secretly. Well, not secretly. If you are not that famous, you don't have a very strong influence on people, you can do this. It is fine. But when you grow up or when you are reported by competitors, you do face some problems. But the worst case is you are blocked by the Great Firewall. You will not be charged or punished in any case. Okay, so now we are talking about how to legally run a website or an app in China, and now you start to collecting data. And that is our third topic today: data privacy, data protection, and data export. When you getting your data, the first thing you need to do is that you need to distinguish what is personal data and what is personal sensitive data. And the MIT have published a standard called Information Security Technology Personal Information Security Specifications. And in this standard, it have a very detailed classifications of what kind of data is accounted for personal data. Actually, all the data listed here are personal data. And data marked in orange is personal sensitive data. So we can have a quick view. So personal information, basically, that is your name, birthday. So this kind of basic information. and the personal identifiable information like your RD card number, military card number, passport number, etc., etc. So this is sensitive data because once you hold this data, you immediately know who exact this user is. So it's quite sensitive. And personal biometric data, still using this data, you can clearly identify who exactly this person is. So it's still a sensitive data. Network identity information is not that because it changed a lot, so it is not sensitive, but it is still personal. And the personal health and physiological information, usually it is data collected from the healthcare activities. It is super sensitive because it's actually worried by many governments, not just China. If there is a leakage of genetic or physiological data, as perhaps other countries can develop bioweapons based on this kind of specific Asian data. I do biology for my degrees, and I personally do not believe that this kind of technology does exist. But this kind of technology exists for now, but perhaps who knows for the future. So the nations, not just China, the European Union and the American states are all very concerned and curious about this. So if you hold health data with physiological information, keep it safe and keep it local. Education and work information like career position, things, those things that matter much. You cannot identify a person using that, and it can change a lot. Personal property data, basically your financial data, it's sensitive. Communication information like records, things like this. It is personal data, but it is actually not that sensitive because those information flows anyway. So contact information, yeah, but it's still because it can change, so it's not sensitive. Internet record, not sensitive. Common equipment information. So basically, if you are an IoT company or like the information from the users' browsers, computers, laptops, cell phones, etc., this kind of personal data as well, but still because you cannot really identify who this person is using this data, it is not sensitive. But location information is sensitive, and some additional information like marriage history, religious beliefs, sexual orientations, undisclosed illegal and criminal reports. So things like this is, even though we cannot identify who you are by using these information, but this information is highly private and highly sensitive, they still come to personal sensitive data as well. So when you have this data and other data like you collect in your apps, like user behaviors, using preference, etc., so you can use it freely. But for those listed personal data and personal sensitive data, you need to obey a series of regulations. And still, there are about 10 plus regulations you need to consider, which is pointless for startup to understand one by one. So I just listed 3 basic principles you need to deal with for data. The first one is transparent. That's when, like in the case of Zhao, so it actually does not acknowledge the use of the data. So even though he acknowledged the type of data collected, but that app doesn't acknowledge the use of the data, so it's still illegal. So make sure in the term of use, you tell your user what data you are collecting, why you are collecting this data, what this data will be used for, ask for the agreement before you collect it, and collect only necessary data. There are one examples of, let me think. So there are some e-commerce platform who is collecting the location of the consumers. They are doing so is because they want to analyze the track of their consumers to identify like how rich this consumer is. For example, if I just spend most of the time in rural areas, perhaps I'm not a super buyer. But if I just spend most of the time in a central banking district, it's perhaps I'm a super buyer. But this kind of data perhaps will account for unnecessary data for e-commerce platforms. So many e-commerce platforms are warned by the cybersecurity administrations because they are collecting that. And the first principle is transparent. So the core idea is that acknowledge your user before collecting and use. And the second is free choice. It's actually, if it is requested by the data source, that is your user, they want to know what data you have collected from them. You have to show them this. And usually some apps is now designing channels that users can check what kind of data have been collected. And second is delete the data collected if requested by the data source. So if I'm a user, I'm using Taobao or Amazon, and they collected many of my past order histories, and they are using it for analytical reasons, and I hate that because I don't want my preference of buying being known by any third parties, and I can just request the Alibaba to delete my data. It is okay. And to be a legal data holder, you have to cooperate with the user or the data source if they ask. And also, if you are running an app or a website, there must be a physical channel to log off. So total deletion of the account. There are also many apps in China who refuse to do so and are shut down. And also, make sure that you delete the data if they log off. And we are talking about transparency and free choice. And the third one is secure. So in the data regulations, the entities, whether an individual or a company who holds the data is with the legal responsibility to keep this data safe. And all you need to do is actually just meet the national standard of cybersecurity and also separate storage of personal data and other data. So if there is a leakage of your usual commercial data, well, perhaps that's fine, it's only damage yourself, but a leakage of personal data will damage public rights. So many companies' decision is that they store separately. Commercial data in one server and personal data in one server, and they set up a bridge to communicate between the two servers. Oops, I think I lost the picture here again. Anyway, so then we are talking about CPC following the security considerations. So CPC is a classified protection of cybersecurity certifications. And this one is operated by the Ministries of Public Security, MPS. So you can see that it's actually related to cybercrime. It is anti-cybercrime actions that it requires any tech startups to host the data to protect their data in a proper way. So there are 5 tiers of CPCs, and which tiers you should obey really can be determined by checking this table. The idea is, imagine your data is damaged and is leaked, and what kind of damage it will bring to other object. So a general damage perhaps means some leakage. Severe damage means a total leakage or temporary breakdown, and extreme damage means complete breakdown. So usually a tech startup also need to do a T2, and if a company is doing artificial intelligence service for example, for medical care or financial industries, they usually need to do T4 because this medical care and financial services is related to social orders and public rights. And if you are just running a communities, if a data is leaked, it also damages the personal or group right. You can do T1, but usually people do T2 just in case. Because I think none of the driver here is related to national security, so we just forgot it. And how to be certificated is actually a very self-oriented and self-motivated applications. So you firstly determine the type of the CPC by yourself, and you submit the materials of the local ministries of public securities. And then they will ask you to find and qualified institutions by yourself, and they will try to hack your server. And if you win, so not if you win, so if you successfully protect your data, you pass a certification and you will got these certifications. So perhaps you think it will be awfully difficult to find a qualified institution by yourself, but it's actually not that difficult. Most cloud servers like Huawei, Alibaba, AWS, Tencent, and Microsoft can actually link you to qualified institutions if you buy their services. So you don't need to worry that much. You just talk to their customer success support and you got it solved. So it is a very new regulation starting from 2019. And now the market is already very matured. And also, if you are not using this kind of public cloud and you want to build your private servers, it is still okay. I can introduce you some agencies that can do this kind of qualified examinations as well. And by the way, so if you're using Huawei and Alibaba or Tencent, they can do the ICP for you as well. But AWS and Microsoft, so these foreign cloud servers, I don't think they had a qualification for conduct service like this, but they can introduce you to their trusted agencies as well. So if you meet the problem of ICP license and CPC certificate or EDI license, you just talk to your cloud server. Okay, let's talk about data export. So now you collect your data, you keep it safe, you are doing business in China well, and you want to do some global collaborations, sending back the data back to Korean or to wherever. Then my suggestion is, my best recommendation is to stay local because it keeps you away from all sorts of troubles. Because unfortunately, the regulations of data export now is not very clear. If you want to know what is most likely to take place, you could have a look at the GDPR, so the General Data Protection Regulations from the European Union, because China is running its policy schema based on their understanding of the GDPR. But luckily, though no laws or standards have been enacted, but there are already some drafts for comments which is already published, and Beijing government is trying to have several trials on it. I'm personally, not personally, so I'm officially working with the Beijing government to work it with some large corporate because they have tremendous data and they pay enough taxes, partially because of that. And so we are trying to working out a standard way of doing so. And I think some solutions will come out in Beijing at the beginning of the next year. And here are some recommended ways that are most likely to be what it will be like in the future. So the first one is de-identifying data collected. So as we just mentioned, data protections majorly focusing on personal data and personal sensitive data. So it means if you are export data that are not personal related and are not that sensitive, it should be fine. And there are three steps of doing so. First is your original data, and you de-identify the data. So by saying de-identifying data, it means irreversible removal of sensitive data. And there's no way to reason back who is the data source from the data remained. And there are multiple methods are accepted. You can do sampling, clustering, encrypting, giving fake names to it. And also you can just delete sensitive data if you want. If you want to know more details for it, you can read guide for de-identifying personal information. It is also a draft for commentary and it's a national standard as well. and then you can export this data without risk. But in some special cases, you really want to export personal data, which I highly do not recommend. Then you can apply to local cyberspace administrations. My personal suggestion is to just forget it and doing something else, because it is purely a regulation gray zone. And because most regulation authorities in China is very passive, so they don't risk themselves on doing something that's completely new. So I don't recommend you to do it for the recent period, but perhaps things will be changing in 1 or 2 years. Okay, so let's move to problem-solving part. As I just mentioned, as a WFOE company or foreign invested enterprise, there are many restrictions for you on this kind of, you cannot get ICP license, your data cannot export, etc., etc. But it doesn't mean that your business don't here and you need to leave China. There are many ways that you can solve it by using different business mode. The first one and the most recommended one by myself is actually go global and run local. So you have a WFOE companies is owned by the founder of the company or the overseas mother companies. And it's actually most of you are planning to do in China. And if you do want to get an ICP license, then my recommendation is that you set up a domestic companies that is owned by the Chinese partner or the Chinese representatives. And you control this domestic company not through shareholders, but share agreement or contract. So here you got your mother companies, you got your domestic company, and this domestic company have a Chinese legal person, meaning it is a purely 100% domestic companies which can conduct ICP services as well. And a very good example is Fleeto. So Fleeto is a translation platform that our user help users to translate by artificial ways. And it sells paired translated data to large big tech companies like Tencent and Apple's. And they are quite successful in China, and they are now already IPO in Korea. InnoWay has started to accelerate it from 6 years ago, and we are still in a very good contact. So let's see how Fleeto solves problems. So this Lian Xiu, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it in Korean, but it's the Fleeto's founders and the CEOs in Koreans. So he registered a company here at InnoWays, and it's a WFOE company. It is 100% owned by the Korean Fleeto. And here the Dr. Huang is their Chinese representatives, and their Chinese companies is fully owned by this kind of Chinese representatives. And they conduct ICP, their apps and websites based on these domestic companies, and they do successfully got an ICP license using this way. And second is that you are WFOE companies, but you just provide service based on domestic business partners or Chinese companies or Chinese platforms. There are many ways to do so. So let's say if I'm an artificial intelligence companies and I just using SDK to empower Chinese websites rather than running my own Chinese website, it is okay. So let's back to the ICP licensing part. I said there are 2 ICP license. One is license you need to apply, and one is ICP filing. You only need to register. For WFOE company, you can still have your own website in China. So ICP filing is okay for foreign companies. All you need is just to fill a table. And if you are artificial intelligence service providers and you are providing service in the form of SDK, so it's actually, I forgot which exact regulation it's from. I can check for you if you are really interested. So it have specified that if it is a data collected by the host app and you are just a functional SDKs, all you need to do is just acknowledge the host app, the type and the usage of collected data, and the host app will be in charge of acknowledging the users. And if you're just using the data that's already collected by the host app, you need to do nothing. You just provide the service. And if you are holding the data or you are holding the data, you need to find some way to negotiate with the end users. But as long as you start to negotiate with the end user, it means you need an ICP license. So that's what my recommendation is, that if you are a WFOE company or you have a foreign shareholder larger than 50%, you choose the first two ways. You are just providing a functional SDK service in China. So here's examples of this. A Top Tutor is a company founded by a British founder and is incubated by Innoway as well. So they are providing online tutors for foreign educations like A-level, TOEFL, SATs, GREs, etc. So this one is actually education ICP. In education ICP is even harder to get because you must have CPC first, then you can be licensed to an educational ICP. It is a current regulations. So they just skip it. So what they made is that they have developed an SDKs and they are collaborating with this domestic education giants, and they even don't have a salesperson as well. So this kind of like New Orientals and Good Futures will sell their course and got a sale bonus, and they provide courses. So it makes things much easier, and this company is focusing on training tutors and recruiting tutors, and have a very good development net as well. So, and here is also the ICP license it got. It can be Beijing ICP Bay, and Bay, it just means feelings. So if you are WFOE companies, here we show that it is, oops, I cannot see it here. So if you are just a WFOE company, so this company is a WFOE company. If you're a WFOE company, you can still do ICP feelings as well. It just, you cannot conduct commercial activities based on this. And also grow on local platforms. That is, actually in the WeChat sessions, someone have introduced the WeChat mini app. So WeChat mini apps is much easier to develop compared to the usual apps. It is not bounded to iOS or Android, because as long as you can install WeChat, you can use WeChat mini apps. And most surprisingly, mini app does not need an ICP license, because the Tencent will be responsible if the content of this mini app goes wrong. So the idea that's why a WFOE company cannot get an ICP license is because there is no 法律追责主体. So because a WFOE company doesn't have a legal entities that the Chinese government can pursue, because you are a foreigner, so and Chinese law doesn't applies to you. So that's why this and that's why a WFOE company cannot get an ICP license. But if you are running it on the platforms, that this platform will be the entity for the legal pursuit, and the platform will be responsible to regulate your content. And so we can see that Coca-Cola is actually a WFOE companies, have their mini apps, and Nestle, a Swiss company, they have their mini apps as well, and Morphe, a British company, have their mini apps as well. And Akadu is actually a startup incubated by Innoway, who is doing spontaneous translations, and they are not licensed with the ICP license, but they can still do mini apps, and they provide a server based on mini apps, because basically everyone in China has a WeChat. Oops, so ideally there should be a map, but they lost. Sorry for that, but it's okay. It's just acknowledge that because there's a digital free trade zone in Beijing, so I believe that there will be many changes in the following 2 years. And when you are small, you can just start your business, because if you are small, you don't have much influences. As long as you are not reporting, no one will bother you whether you have a SCP license or not. And we can wait and see. So I do heard about some cases that the foreign companies do got ICP license in the recent years, but I'm not quite sure whether the success is replicatable or not. But actually here what I want to show is that the Beijing shows that its free trade zone will focusing on IT service and the digital trade. So digital economic is one of the focus that the free trade zone of Beijing is trying to open its policies and welcome more and more foreign startups and perhaps large corporates as well to start their business in China. Okay, here is the end of my presentations.